Does Sorare need saving? Can SO11 be the new game mode to do such a thing? I don't know the answer to these questions, but today we're going to look at how I would implement SO11 into Sorare. Now, Sorare has strictly been SO5 since its inception, that being a 5-man lineup, but another game in the same crypto Web3 football market that briefly challenged Sorare was Ultimate Champions. I say was, as Unagi and the owners have, completely nuked the game to the point of it being virtually dead at this point, but that doesn't mean Sorare can't take a few ideas and points of view from said shit game. Ultimate Champions had similar gameplay, a scoring matrix, and other similarities like that, except the format was 11-a-side. And seeing as we're discussing SO11 today, I'm sure this won't be the last comparison between those two this video. So anyway, how would I implement SO11 into Sorare? Starting with the competitions on offer itself, I would come in light testing SO11 in an all-star capacity, where a card from any region goes. This way managers have a chance to use all those random stragglers in their accounts while, not putting too much weight on the Sorare ecosystem by introducing a champion SO11, a contender SO11, an under 23 SO11 all at the same time, Not saying we can't have those eventually once the game mode fully gets going and integrated, maybe even eventually offering a SO11 for the big 3 leagues, for instance, but, baby steps to begin with, starting at All-Star. I'd maybe even say 2 entries per manager at limited and rare level. Now, in terms of competition rules, I would make SO11 completely classic only. I mean, you can obviously still use in-season cards if you really want to, like you currently can in classic competitions, sure, not saying you can't, but allowing 4 classic sides to enter SO11 would be my thinking to not only give those cards more value on the market, however small that may be, but also give them more utility as the classic player pool only gets bigger and bigger with each passing season. Now, instead of having players in the extra slots as we do for SO5, I think a few set formations to allow managers to tinker their lineups and the players from each position that they use would be beneficial. Obviously, your classic 4-4-2, 3-4-3 for the more attacking managers, 5-3-2 if someone wants to lob in their spare defenders. You get the picture, you know how formations work. Then the next thing in my eyes that would be a must to make this not an absolute sweatfest at the very top would be a points cap. Ultimate Champions managed to implement a points cap in some of their competitions, and their scoring system and scoring matrix is completely uncapped, so if anything, Sorare will have an easier time setting and adjusting their cap initially. My thoughts would be 11 players on the pitch at a 45 last 15 rating gives you a 495 points cap, and at that point you might as well round it up to 500. It would still allow managers to get in some high-end 50 to 60 last 15 scoring players, but it means you can't go so overpowered as you're now having to balance the squad out across the pitch with some 35s, for example, to stay within that points cap total. And another adjustment or criteria I would create to also keep this as level a playing field as possible would be a stacking limit. I mean, balls to the wall, I guess, if someone tries to predict a full 11-man stack lineup. But I think realistically we should look at avoiding stacks in this potential, new SO11 mode. Keep it fun and fresh. Everyone sort of plays at an even level. Managers who aren't heavily stacked with one team still have a chance to compete with the big boys. My proposal in that event, honestly, would then be a max 2 from any club. It might seem tight, but honestly, it's all-star. If you can't come up with an 11-a-side team without stacking across the pitch, then I'm going to firmly square that blame on you. So yeah, I just think a limit of 2 players per club is the sweet point where you wouldn't be able to just cluster players up across the pitch. For instance, I may want my Martinez and Thuram up top, knowing that I've got Çalhanoğlu in behind, giving me good chances of getting double decisives, a mixture of assists and goals from all 3 players combined. But a stacking limit of 2 per club now means I have to sacrifice either Çalhanoğlu in the hole or one of the forwards up top. I have to be a bit more tactical and thoughtful, basically, instead of just lumping in bottlenecks from specific clubs in groups across the pitch. Now, in terms of DMPs, we get enough complaints in SO5, so I'm sure SO11 would only amplify that. So this is where I think a bench could come into the fray to placate everyone. My proposal would be 3 bench positions, 1 for defender, midfielder and forward. That way, if one of your starting players in that designated slot DMPs, the bench player will come in nice and simple. However, it's actually not so simple, because the aim for the bench should be for managers to have a backup player for unexpected DMPs, not to make the bench overpowered in any sense of the word. So I toyed with some ideas on how to incorporate a bench. Now, for anyone unaware, Ultimate Champions had a strategy, a legitimate strategy, might I add, but kind of a sneaky method of gaming the system called the DNP trick, where you would pick 0-point epic cards in your lineup to meet the competition entry requirements, and then have a high-scoring common on the bench ready to come in and take that player's place. As high-scoring commons such as Lamine Yamal were fairly easy to obtain for free in the normal game, save yourself a bit of money and get a world-class player coming on, and it's not exactly the same in translation to Sorare, but it comes across in another way through 0-scoring players. Take adding El Arouche and Murroy here. I originally had 387 points remaining, with 9 players left to select in my SO11 lineup, giving me an average of 43 points per player for my remaining picks. But now I have the exact same points remaining with only 7 players to select, allowing me up to 55 points on average per remaining player. And you might be thinking, Royalivi, what's the fucking issue? Those 2 players won't be playing and will score you 0 points. Well, you'd be wrong, because this is where the bench itself comes in. Now, I did think of a 120 point cap for the bench, but I can now add, for instance, Mbappe and Musiala as they come in at under 120 points, not select a defender, and now all of a sudden I have 2 world-class players coming on for those 2 DNPs. Well, I also managed to utilise the extra points I had available on my 7 other outfield players due to using this DNP trick. I hope we're all following so far. A similar issue arises if you offer each bench position, say, only 40 points individually. And yeah, well, I can no longer have Mbappe and Musiala as my DMP trick substitutes, so a slight improvement on that workaround. I can now still have 8 incredible outfielders alongside 3 DNPs, as long as I have 3 bench players coming on who score under 40 in their last 15 average. So while a slight nerf, the overriding issue still remains. This is still a flaw in any substitute system. Now, off the top of my head, I can think of 2 ways around this. Method 1, impose a minimum score limit on starting lineup players of 30 points. This way, the point of picking a DMP player on purpose to get a better scoring substitute in their place is negated by the fact that you've already used 30 points in your starting lineup for this DMP player, especially if the bench still maintains a max 40 point limit per slot anyway, right? So those 10 extra points for a DMP trick player aren't really ever going to be worth the squeeze. The only caveat here is this is annoying in the event you have a 0-point goalkeeper coming back from injury. You know, that's tactically fair and would be a good use of the points cap, and you would no longer be able to use them this way, but I think you just have to take that sacrifice on the chin to prevent DNP shenanigans that I just mentioned. Method 2 is then having bench players impact the total points cap overall in general, maybe upping it to 550 points total. It gives the riskier folk amongst us, 50 points per player, if we want to just risk a starting 11 only. But, for those of us who are worried about a player or 2 who may not get picked or, get any points, we'll still have enough room to get a good squad out while adding some players on the bench as backup. Now, I'm less keen on this idea, as 50 points per player if you only go for a starting 11 is certainly enough to get a pretty worldly squad out there for stacked accounts. Whereas 45 points on average involves much more concessions to stay within that points total. Basically, I'm not sure. This is the tricky sticking point I get to when I consider substitutes and SO11. And I mean, there's always the option of just having no bench at all, right? Which I'm certainly not against, but the DNPs will be flowing. It would just take a bit more research to not pick those DNPs, especially now that Sorare Inside Predictions are integrated to Sorare itself, right? I feel like maybe a bench isn't necessary, but at the same time, people would want a bench for 11 players. I don't know. It's tricky. Let me know in the comments what you think about any bench situation here. So semantics out the way there, let's talk extra bonuses to keep this game mode entertaining and give it a bit of a skill edge on top of that as well. Of course, you'll have your normal card bonuses, right, which will always come down to who has spent the most money on their collection and XP boosting. That's just the way that one is, nothing we can do about that. Obviously, captain is one for a 50% bonus, but for SO11, why not introduce a vice captain as well, who can then offer an additional 25%. Just an extra, choice where you have to pick the right player to get that extra boost, and the boost will always be a massive difference when it comes to the top of the leaderboards. That could be make or break in terms of winning or coming 7th. Now, rewards is perhaps the tricky one. I'm thinking in my head there would only be 2 competitions, so I have to pay users out on, right, the limited and rare level. Not that I want to discriminate against, super rare and unique owners, but I'm not quite sure there's the depth of cards or managers there to quite offer SO11 on the side. Maybe super rare, I don't really know. Let's just say right now, rare and limited, 2 entries into only 1 competition. I feel like Sorare could scrounge up some extra pocket change to pay out some money here. And, I'm not just talking about rewarding cards and essence and market credits here. I'm talking about, fucking cold hard cash money that you can spend in stores on items to improve your life. Let's just say like the top 500 places could get paid, you know, it all depends on entries, right? Specials right now in SO5 get upwards of 30k. If SO11 got, say, you know, 10k entrants right now, that would only be the top 5% getting paid, so nothing too damaging for Sorare's bottom line, but still enough to go about that I feel like, you know, managers would still want to play this, and having a level playing field with all the criteria suggested above wouldn't make them think they're so disadvantaged against the best managers and best cards out there. I feel like it would be worth a lot of people's time. And, you know, you can always then start offering essence for the next 1,000 players and market credits and XP and such for the top 25 and 50% sort of thing. But, you know, I feel like money is the way to go. And just to clarify as well, by the way, any players that a manager uses in SO5 is then ineligible for SO11 in my thought process. You know, it's not like a completely separate mode to the main SO5 in that respect. You know, you can select players for both, but you can only select them for one, which is like an oxymoron, but it does make sense because you can do both, but you have to pick one. Can't do both, but you can do both. But you can only do one. Fuck. So managers will basically have to decide, do they go strong in SO5 and put out the backup players in SO11 for a slim chance at something extra there, or do they go with a stronger team in SO11 at the risk of weakening a SO5 entry? One of the great balancing acts of life itself. And you know, if Sorare feel like it, they can even start offering rewards and competitions for monthly leaderboards to really give the mode bang for its buck, but perhaps I'm really overextending what I think can be feasibly achieved here in terms of implementation and rewards to match, but I don't know, I'm just rambling here. It's something I've had in my head for a while now, that SO11 could not only really positively impact the classic side of the game, but it could also be a barrel of fun, maybe even 2 barrels worth of fun. But hey, let me know your thoughts on my proposal and SO11 in general in the comments down below. I'm sure there's a glaring loophole or reason I've missed as to why this game mode would never work, but I ain't smart enough for that. But hopefully you're all smart enough to stick around on the channel for next video, and I'll catch you then, because I love you.